Hi, everybody. I'm Misty Roberts, and I am your fantastic host for this part two of this SoundGirls webinar on tour managing. Last week, we did 2 hours worth of questions that had come in, primarily focusing on any advice that any of you guys had for up-and-coming tour managers. We talked a lot about how to manage when you're holding dual hats on a tour, like front of house or monitors, as well as tour managing. And I just wanted to let everybody know that's uploaded. Part 1 is uploaded on YouTube on the SoundGirls page. It's entitled Intro to TM in Front of House. I'm also going to put it over, a link to it over here in the comments on the Zoom. And it's also posted on the SoundGirls Facebook page. So that's where you can find all of that. I'm going to start it off again this week with having each one of you guys just really quickly introduce yourselves. Dana, do you want to start out?
Sure. Hey, everybody. This is Dana Walks, and I'm a front of house engineer, monitor engineer, tour manager, touring since 2003 full-time, and I live in Brooklyn, New York.
Tiff, what about you?
I'm Tiffany Hendren. I live in St. Louis, Missouri. I'm a tour manager and front of house engineer. I work at a couple of venues in St. Louis, the Pageant and Del Mar Hall, and I'm on the board of SoundGirls.
Cool. And Mary?
Hi, I'm Mary Broadbent. I live in Los Angeles, and I work as a tour manager, guitar backline tech for bands on the road, and I've been touring since about 2004. And yeah, that's about me.
Cool. And Max, what about you?
Hey, I'm Max. Maxime Brunet is my full name, but that's usually too much for the Anglophone people to pronounce. I'm from Ottawa, Canada. I've lived a couple different places, and I'm pandemic stranded at my parents' right now. I work primarily as a tour manager in front of house. I've also worked in venues and also worked on as monitors as well.
Cool. Well, this week we are going to talk about advancing and pre-tour organization. And everybody has their little chunk of it, but I'm going to kind of, throw this to specific people. Everybody has prepared for this, and we've got a lot of really cool documents to show and screen shares and things like that. So Dana, I'm going to let you start. You shared last week a little bit about your pre-tour organization, and I was incredibly impressed by a lot of your your manner of doing it. So I'm going to throw this to you to get us started, and then everybody else can just kind of jump in with suggestions or ways that they have for pre-tour organizing as well.
Great. Well, I'll start off by saying I'm hyper-organized because I have to be, because I have made mistakes in the past, and that's why I've learned that I really do. My personal style is I have to be checking everything 3 times so I don't make a mistake. So in that sense, especially now that we all have laptops, I started touring before laptops or phones or anything. Now that I have laptops, it's really easy to keep myself organized with folders and whatnot, and certain documents that I use for every tour. Now, these documents I use, they tend to get refined each tour I do. Perhaps there's some information that's not needed for one tour that's needed for the next, and everything's constantly evolving and changing. So there's not one way to do it for me. It's always a learning process of what's necessary for that tour, for that manager that's hired you, that you're dealing all the docs with. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen and show you the first doc that I like to send out. So let me know if, let's see. Are you seeing, hold on, let me see, preview. Here we go. Let's try this one. Are you seeing that? where it
Yes.
says tour info, name and position. This is my tour personnel doc, and I send this to everybody that's going to be on the road. There's many reasons for this, but the main reason is so that you don't have to ask these questions more than once. Let's see. So it's all pretty self-explanatory. A lot of this information you will need if, say, if you're filling out, if you're going to Canada and you have to fill out an immigration request for the border, a lot of this information you'll need. Passport information, if you're booking flights, especially, you will need. Medical conditions, food allergies, and dietary restrictions are great. Say if there's a catering request that you have to make on behalf of somebody. Emergency contact, obviously. Then things just to make your life easier if you're dealing with a travel agent or if you're doing all the travel booking yourself. Airline preferences, airport codes. Don't ask for airport, ask for the airport code because then you can't get it wrong. Seat preferences, you know, because the last thing you need is somebody bitching because they don't have an aisle seat. Frequent flyer information, known traveler, if you have global entry, and special meal preferences. All these things, if you only have to ask for it once and you pay attention to these details, it's so appreciated. And then finally, swag. Say, you know, Converse is hosting a 10 at Coachella and has offered you guys some stuff. Just, you have all the information there. You don't have to waste time waiting for somebody to answer or not answer an email. It just helps you become self-sufficient in the end of the day, especially if you're doing a full year of touring. You're going to need all this information at one point or another. Ladies, is there anything missing that that you like to ask for?
I actually, on my personal document that I also have their mother and father's full name and birth date, because often if you go anywhere in South America and those require visas, they're going to ask those questions.
Great point.
Other than that, you pretty much covered it all.
A new thing I've added recently is preferred pronoun, which, you know, I'm really grateful that we can have, you know, we can support everybody on the tour and make sure that if there is any question or if they're sensitive about how they're treated by local crew, you'll know in advance that these are the terms that they prefer, and you can alert local staff if you need to. So cool. So that's the tour personnel. And going into the next document, this is so basic, but it's just for information purposes. If you are going into Canada, for example, from the States, and you don't have a carnet, having a gear manifest is really helpful. And then eventually, once the band gets big enough, you will need a carnet, which is basically, it's a legal document for customs. You get it stamped whenever you cross into a country. And it will save you a lot of time and trouble. I was on a tour. I was with the support band, but we were sharing a bus with the headliners from England, and we were on a tour bus with a big trailer, and they tried to go through without a carnet, and we ended up sitting for like 8 hours at a customs station right outside the border. So, you know, if you're in a smaller van, something like this, if they ask for a carnet, you can give them this, you know, if you don't want to spend the money. It's about $1,000, but it's a one-time payment until you have to add extra pages. But this is, again, self-explanatory. Put item, you know, SansAmp pedal, or, you know, stomp box and brand SansAmp and whatnot.
Hey, Dana.
Yeah.
I don't think it switched over from the tour personnel
It
document.
didn't. Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Let's see. How do we do this? I'm so new to Zoom. Let's see. Oh, okay. Stop share. And then if I go back to share screen and I pick, I see. Okay, guys, I'm new to this.
We all are.
I'm also kind of a boomer, so, you know. How's that? Is that working?
Yeah.
Is that better? Okay. Thank you. So yeah. So it's really, this is just my basic sheet. It's not a legal document or anything important. It's just, you know, an Excel sheet that I drew out. So these are the things that you will need for a carnet eventually. And if you don't have a carnet, if you're in a smaller band, it's just worth doing anyway. It's great for insurance reasons. Even if you decide you want to get all of your gear insured, you have all the information that they will need.
It also, I've had a situation in the past where our, super early in my career, our van and trailer got stolen. And the fact that I had all of the serial numbers and model numbers for everything, it helped with insurance, but it also, that list then got distributed via old school Bobnet, and we actually got a bunch of our stuff back.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so helpful for so many reasons, and you won't know until you actually need it. But it's a drag to pull off like every pedal off your pedal board, but it's absolutely worth it. And make sure you get this done before you leave for tour. Okay, so let me see. I'll go to my last document, which is a little bit involved, so I really apologize. And I'm really just going to skim through this, but if there are any questions anybody wants to send me after the fact so that we can move on to the next subject, I'm happy to answer after this is done. So this is my budget. Let me close that little window. Okay. So I have this one worksheet I use, which is my budget, and it is also my road sheet, which shows expenses. It's also my income sheet, and it's also show sheet. So let me kind of go over this really quickly. Obviously, a budget is going to determine, it's going to try to prophesize how much money you're going to make or lose on a tour. I have down this first column different expenses. These again will change depending on the tour, how you're transporting yourself, how many people are on the tour, whatnot. You can see all the subject matters here. And again, this will change. And I have my final numbers down here. The way this works, the way I use this to work is, say, I have it all self-calculating. Say I have a band flight, one band, like one flight is $500 and there's 5 people in the band. You have your amount, number of days or the number of units, and it comes out. And then in the next columns over here, that's where I put my actual expenditures. So I have a side-by-side comparison at the end of a tour of how much I spent versus how much I was expecting to spend. Cash and credit expenses are basically the same sheet. I will say I'm on tour January 1st, and the first expense is, say, per diem. And I will scroll to the per diem section, PDs, which is, a daily allowance, and say $20. And it goes in, it should self-calculate there, but I think that one field got erased somehow. And at the end of the day, I can see the total cash out, as well as all the different categories that correspond to the budget. Income, same idea. You have a show day in, let's say, Philadelphia, and you collected, say, $1,000 cash. You come in here, you see at the bottom, self-calculates. As you go down, the number will go up. Say merch, you made, let's see, say you made in Philadelphia, if I can spell that correctly, say you made $500. So you have the total merch cash received, and you have the both numbers. They add up, self-calculating down here. So you have $1,500 cash on hand. Once you get into it and you start having some cash expenses, it will show up in this field here, and you'll have bottom line. It's like, it's a lot to go through, but I do this every day after a tour, or as much as I can during the day. And that way I know, like, I have the right amount of cash on hand. This last page is just, I fill this in before the beginning of the tour. Philadelphia, say you're playing Union Transfer, and you make $15,000 from that show. And again, you go down and I list all my shows, and then I have the total that we expect for income. Now, if it's a door deal, I'll err on the side of caution and put in a smaller number than what I expect, but that's just because you never want to overreach on a budget. And it all comes down here and self-calculates. Again, all the budget numbers will show up here. Let's all add it up. I add in a 5% contingency. That makes the total shortfall. Then minus, you add in the fees for the agents and management and the business management. And then it just all adds up together. It took me a couple of years of working with this sheet and kind of making it my own. But that's basically how I keep everything on one sheet. It's constantly updated. When I put in a cash expense somewhere else, it shows up in a relative field. And yeah, that's how. It's a lot. I apologize, but it's taken. It's taken a while. Misty, you're muted. There you go.
There we go. No, it's actually a wonderful budget sheet. And I have a question for you for, a first timer that is trying to, navigate their way through this. When you do your budgets, is it something that, you're filling in this projected budget sheet and then you send that to a manager and, they say, oh, let's add more here, let's take out more here. Are you with the manager and going through this?
Every manager works differently. I always work with the management. I will advise, I think I made a point last week about, being very realistic and standing your ground, because you're the one that's handling the money and you are ultimately the one that is responsible for sticking with the budget. So you don't want to make a budget just to make somebody happy. You want to make a budget that can compromise as much as possible to make them happy, but also be realistic. So yeah, a manager will send me a budget, a different type of worksheet perhaps. I will try my best to work off of my worksheet, but if they want me to work off of theirs, then I'll do that. That's fine. And then I'll tack on my road expenses onto their worksheet at the end of the day. But yeah, I mean, you have to work with them. I recently had a tour where they wanted to spend $50 a night on a hotel room. And I'm asking, do you want us to get bed bugs? I mean, that's, you have to make these points that they've never toured before. They don't spend that time on the road that you do. Right. Also do a lot of research before you start, communicating with the manager. If there's some kind of doubt, if they say, oh, well, I always get rooms at this price in this city, and, Google it, you have the internet, you can see what works, or ask somebody.
Ask them where it is that they're getting those rates and how, maybe they have a hookup that you don't, or that your travel agent might not. I've had that scenario quite a few times.
I would just always say err on the side of caution at the beginning, especially.
Totally.
I mean, just be careful. I always put it out to the management as, this is the worst case scenario, so it can only get better from here. And that tends to soften the blow a little bit. So.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Have you ever had a situation, that you haven't maybe gone through, this is the worksheet that I use, and then had problems later on with the management not understanding it, or
yes,
wanting you like mid-tour to use something else?
Yes, or after a tour has wrapped, 3 weeks later, when they're finally going over their finances, going, I don't understand how you work this out. I always make a point of having a meeting first and making sure they understand my workflow and that they're okay with it, and get it in writing on an email that, so we're good to go with my worksheet. My budget's fine. You've approved this budget dated this date. I keep it crystal clear as much as possible before I get on a flight.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a question over here that, can we talk about technology formats? The standard out on the road for a lot of people being Apple, asking if it's okay to still use Windows and Android. I can tell you from myself, I use an Apple laptop, but I still also use Microsoft Word and Excel for a lot of things. You know, I've tried to use Pages, Google Docs, Google, all of it. I always find myself going back to my old original Microsoft Excel worksheets. Dana, have you ever had, you know, any management that's ever been a problem with that preference?
No, I haven't had that before, but I use the numbers and Pages docs on Apple, and you can export them as Excel if you need to. So, you know, I haven't run into that issue yet.
Yeah, me neither. Mary, do you have anything that you want to add to this part about the, you know, the budget worksheets, personnel sheets, anything like that?
Well, I think Dana kind of killed it. She did an amazing job. This is a great sheet. I wanted to steal it from you.
I'll give it to you. Here's the thing. I've made everything I have here is a collaboration. It's stuff I've gotten from other people, plus my own ideas, and it's ever growing. So yeah, I'm happy to share. There's no intellectual property, you know.
Yeah.
No copyright.
I will say just a personal question, only based off my own experience, because I've dealt with business managers who are very insistent on using their own sheets. So do you then just use theirs and also use yours, or you just like ignore yours completely and go to just straight using theirs?
I use mine in conjunction with theirs if that's the case, just so that I know that I'm on the same, like, you know, I know that my calculations are correct. I know my sheet.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, it's extra work, but I mean, that's the job, is to be correct with the client's money. You know, you have to think of them as clients. I'm not gonna screw up somebody's money.
Yeah.
You know, it happened once before, and you know, then I learned, and you know, because I was using a worksheet that I didn't realize the self calculations. There was one formula that was off that affected the entire sheet.
Yeah.
So, and it was scary as hell.
I think that we've all had that happen before. And because that's all it takes is, you know, one mistype of the finger and the delete, and, you know, your entire worksheet's gone. Which also brings me to the point, always make sure that you've got, you know, an original copy of whatever that you're working off of, so that you can go through and figure out if a formula is off. You know, I go through mine at least once a day and just eye it to make sure that everything appears normal, you know, because I mean, you can generally look and see, you know, in a field if something looks completely off. So I also keep backups of everything as well. A lot of people would probably say that I overdo it on the amount of places that I keep everything, but it also, the way I look at that, it keeps me protected as well. I'm just like you, Dana. I want to make sure that I have in writing, this is the date that this is approved. You're saying yes to this. This is, you know, this is how much we plan on spending on this. I need you to reply to this with an okay to that.
It's necessary. There's, unfortunately, I've experienced it. I know a lot of people have experienced it, gaslighting in the industry. You know, you're the one that you know, management can deem replaceable, and you need to make yourself irreplaceable. So not making mistakes, or if you make a mistake, going up to it immediately and start finding a solution for it. But this is, you know, this is somebody's career. The musician usually has no clue what's happening with the budget, and they won't care until the end of the tour, where they expected to make, you know, have an extra $5,000 cash in their pocket, and they don't have it, and they're going to want to know why. And the management, and you might have flown back across country, and the management, you know, might delegate all the blame to you. But you know, if you
out
have
of sight, out of mind. Totally.
Yeah. I've had to defend myself once. I'm not gonna say with whom, but you know,
I've had to do it more than once.
Yeah. It's unfortunate, but it is
unfortunate, but it's also, you know, I think it's definitely up to us to be able to, like you said, admit mistakes if they're made, because it shows a lot about your character, first of all. And when the time comes, if you have to defend something that you've done, it's really important to have that black and white backup. Is there anything else that you want to share that you, before a tour, outside of the actual advancing process, that you do to prepare yourself?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, so much goes into the 2 months before a tour. It's kind of hard to break it all down. I mean, there's a lot of personal stuff you have to end up doing. And I guess maybe next week, because I wasn't sure if anybody wanted to hear about this, but I do have every tour manager, or not everyone, but a lot of tour managers will have a Pelican case, and be really thrilled with how I'm pretty proud of my little organizational the way I cut my pick and pluck, you know. So maybe I'll show that off next week, because there's so many, like, again, details, you know, having the right Sharpies for the artists to sign their Black album covers, and
absolutely
having, you know, a contact solution in your case, or, you know, having an extra adapter for your headphones handy, and locking money bag, all these like little things. These are all really good practical things to have, less so as far as advancing, but yeah, I'll pull it out of my closet. And
I think that's a great idea. I agree with you. I had an artist that I worked for that I carried around what I call the diaper bag. Grown man, but it was a diaper bag, you know.
So not shocked.
Red Sharpies, Twizzlers, you know, all of those little creature comforts that, you know, certain people rely upon. And what that's going to look like when we start to go back out on the road, you know. There's going to be cases of hand sanitizer shipped, you know, directly to venues, and it's going to look a little different. You're probably going to need to add some things to that. So I'm excited to talk about that next week. And I'm excited.
Low key diaper bags. They
are. It's perfect.
They're so good. I have one. They're amazing.
Yeah.
So many pockets.
Exactly. It's got pockets for everything. And then you also get to, you know, not that I would say that you ever need to like knock somebody back down a little bit, but you know, when you're working with an artist and you go, hold on, let me grab your diaper bag. It gives them a minute of like, oh God, I'm asking her for some really ridiculous things right now. She's calling that a diaper bag.
One thing I did want to add to Dana talking about the PreAdvance, and I'll make it quick, is Dana, do you have a section for receipts that you either put in a folder or you list on your Excel sheet or scan?
Yeah, so I have that. I'll share one more time. I'll just share that page. So basically, let's see, hold on, blank budget. Okay. Are you seeing that?
I am, yeah.
So basically under cash expenses and credit expenses, this is my road sheet, the road sheet part of the whole worksheet. Again, I'll go in and type in my date, and just, you can see here, it's receipt number 1, and it,
but you know. My question is, do you have a physical, like a...
So okay. So what I'll do is when I put in for receipt number 1, the description, I'll have the physical receipt. I'll write number 1 on it. And then for credit, I'll write 1C. So 1 will just be for cash, 1C will be for credit. And I immediately take a photo and I upload it to a Google Drive. And then I keep the physical receipt as well. And at the end of the tour, when I wrap up accounting, I will send a link to the Google Drive with all the receipts. And then I have the physical receipts as well. Just, I mean, if ever the accounting doesn't match up, it's easier just to get into the receipts, say like when you're traveling and you don't have Wi-Fi or access to a cell signal.
How long do you keep your physical receipts? I mean, in this era, for me, I don't have to any longer send in that, you know, FedEx envelope full of receipts because the scans are fine. How long do you recommend keeping those before you?
Once, I mean, the way I work it out is I don't get paid until tour accounting's done. That way they know that I'm going to get tour accounting in a timely manner to the management. And then once they accept the accounting and I get paid, they get recycled. I still have them in the cloud if I need to look back on anything. Yeah. But I just keep them on hand until I am paid and the tour is clearly closed.
Nice. I use a combination of the Google Drive like you, Dana, and I've also used this other program called Expensify, which has an app on your phone, and you just take a picture of the receipt, it scans it for you, and then it kind of puts it in this nice document that you can print out as a PDF or send out weekly or bi-weekly to management if you need to.
Yep, I use the same app, Mary. It's great. I've also used Shoeboxed, which is a good one as well. Technology.
I think Mastertour even has a place for expenses, so I've never used it.
Does. I haven't really delved into it, but it does.
I'm a Dropbox fan, and it does have a scanning option as well. If I can, I scan the receipt the minute I get it, and then I have management and business management already kind of in a real time Dropbox, so people can keep an eye on spending. And I find that helpful too. Like if people have credit card problems, if something gets flagged, like it can be good for the management to see that, yeah, you did purchase that. And, like it seems to not be a problem as much as when I started touring. But I had a lot of problems like working with foreign bands in the US and like cards being frozen.
Yeah.
It was important for management to see what was really being spent to unfreeze it.
Yep. I've definitely experienced that, an entire tour full of, it felt like every other day, the Amex cards being frozen. So I kind of have done the same thing as you, and that's add, someone from business management onto that account so that they can be monitoring it as well. Well, I think with that, we are going to throw this over to Max, who has so much awesome information to share about her advancing process. Max, do you want to just go ahead and jump into it?
I'm going to jump into it. And if anybody wants to hop in and offer some other notes, I would be happy to pass the mic over. So I think it's important to know before the tour starts, are you working with a headliner or with a support band? So I'll touch a little bit on both, and I'll show you my advancing like I'm the headliner where I ask everything. When you're the support band, there's a bit of a convention that hopefully the headliner will share their information with you. Because I mean, I'm just taking it from the side of the venue. I don't think any venue PM needs to receive the same email twice, when hopefully they could send it, the headliner's tour manager gets it once and then everybody gets the parking directions. So when I personally advance, I will include like in my advance that, yes, I'm the headliner, but the support act is coming in a sprinter as well. So if you could, budget for 2 parking spaces, things like that, just to make their day easier. So if I'm with a support act, before the tour starts, I try to reach out to their management or their tour manager. I usually do this by asking my management to put me in touch. And if not, the agent can usually do it. And I'll send them my updated riders and any tax documents for the tour. It's important to send your updated riders because the agent will have never sent the right one. I could guarantee. And so hopefully then the headliner's tour manager can have my real stage plot and send it forward to the venue. Sometimes headliners don't want to share the information. Mary was talking about that last week, or they're a little slow, so you might have to hop in. I mean, your management or your agent can send you the kind of the deal memo sheet, and it will have production contacts on that, and you can start the reaching out. But I think it is just kind of good form to check in with the headliner, because things like hospitality, as a support act, you don't really have a say in that. The headliner is going to allocate what they want to you. And a little side note about that, I mean, the opener is the guest of the headliner. They might not be drawing, all the fans, but they're still there because somebody wanted them there, hopefully the artist. And I think as a headliner, you have to accommodate your support as much as you can. It really sucks to be on a tour where the hospitality budget is $150 and the support is asking why they can't get buyouts. It's not always an option, but if I have a budget of like $300-400, like I really try and give them $50-100 kind of thing of the day. Cause I mean, they are part of the show. And I mean, they're getting paid so little that it really can make the difference for them to have $10 to go eat.
Can I ask you, Max, what do you do if it's a local band and not somebody who's on the tour that's supporting?
I think it's drink tickets for all. And I've been fortunate enough that the venues usually will comp that.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's been your experience, but if there's a local, I haven't done a lot of tours where there's been local support, to be honest. And the venue would always be like, we'll give them a 6-pack.
Yeah, no, that's about it. But yeah, I feel validated. I've had to explain this decision several times to people.
The locals?
Yes.
Wow.
That weren't just happy to be, getting paid on the show, but everybody's different. I think that comes from inexperience.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's another thing is, I mean, we could talk all day about local band and opener etiquette, but you're a guest, but make yourself scarce. Like, when you're done your set, pack your stuff up, like maybe don't go destroy their green room. Don't go eat the headliner's food unless they told you that you could. Things like that. And I mean, with the locals, that's funny you mentioned. I definitely did a show where the local band, that was a whole new level, but they brought the whole village into the green room.
Where your laptops are locked up and everything.
Yeah, well, I had to tell them, I was like, hey guys, like, this is really like the band's trying to get ready for the show and this is kind of distracting, like, no, not trying to be mean to you, but please just leave. And it's funny because actually the band actually took a backpack that was ours. And it was total mayhem. And I mean, it involved a very drunk local lead singer. And the backpack came back, so it was all okay. But I was like, oh my God, yeah, like that's exactly why, you police that stuff. And the venue security wasn't really helping. And it can be hard to do two jobs. Like I'm mixing front of house. The stage texts me. He's like, they're going back up there. I'm like, what? They're going back to the green room? Because I'd already told the promoter, cut their bracelets. You can't let them in the green room anymore, like backstage access. And so I had to text the promoter, like between songs, like get somebody up there. What is it? So that's why it could be nice.
I've been there, yeah.
Your own tour manager. I'm going to share with you guys some deal memos, just so you can see kind of what we get usually from the agent or the management and where we look for the information before we start the advancing process. So you should see this paradigm deal memo. So I've blanked out a whole lot of information, but I'll tell you what would usually go there. So obviously the name of the artist, the date of the show, and then you've got the promoter, and then the promoter and venue contact. So usually the venue contact would be your production contact, and this is who you would contact for the advance. I've blocked out obviously the guarantee and the walkout potential, but you can see what kind of deal it is here. So it's a flat guarantee and then 90% of gross after a certain amount here that I've blanked out, like I said. If you don't know what a versus deal or gross is or net, I know Carrie shared that in the group, but Jen Kellogg did, she's an accountant. She did a really good webinar on what deals are and how to calculate the math, because there would be math involved in this deal when you're settling. And then you've got here the ticket prices and what the total gross would be. And I'm including the second page of this here, because this would be kind of the terms of the contract. This is a deal memo, which means that this is not signed. And I'm including this because this is just a standard kind of paradigm contract. And there's a line here about hotels, about the purchaser shall provide and pay for prepaid hotel rooms at 5-star hotels of artist's choice. This tour, we were playing rooms like between 400 and 1600 cap. So when I got this contract, I was like, well, this is exciting, or deal memo, sorry. And I was like, this can't be real though. Like for the amount of money that they're being paid, like you would be spending at least $2,000, to get 4 5-star rooms in Chicago. So I messaged the management and they're like, oh yeah, okay, let us ask the agent. They're like, oh yeah, no, that was obviously struck out on the contract. And I'm like, yeah, as one would expect, that you're not going to buy us hotels for a venue show. So you would be emailing this person to get your advancing info, and sometimes it can be the same person, like if it's a promoter-owned venue. And then this is another example of what that could look like. This is again just a deal memo, not a signed contract. So you've got the advance contact here. They actually list it separate, and it's nice because they also include. I mean, the other contract did as well before I blanked it out. But there's actually a phone number there. So if the emails aren't being responded to, you can call the email. And for my Canadian pals, this is an interesting contract because this is for a Canadian band playing a Canadian venue. So you've also got the deal, which was a flat deal. And then on top of that, the purchaser has to agree to pays the tax, which is a pretty standard Canadian contract term. So if the deal was for $1, it would actually be $1.13, your check at the end of the day, right? So, and then they also have a note here about the deposit amount that was sent and when it was received. And so you'll have to deduct the deposit amount when you pick up the check at the end of the night. I also wanted to touch on this. This has a section here on merchandising. So it tells you here that the venue's gonna charge 20% on soft goods, which are t-shirts. Sometimes people will try and take it on flags and other textile things. Sometimes you can argue out of it. And it does say artist sell. And this contract actually, or this memo also had the show times. I did live in Toronto, so I know that this was correct, but this venue actually has a curfew. So I knew this wasn't just like an omission, but it was something to take in account when I did the advancing. And in this other example here, you can see they also had a note on merchandise. So it was in the memo that they are taking 15% on soft, and this venue actually sells for you. You can always check in with your agent if you think this is wrong, or because this is not an officiated contract. So what that means is that both parties have signed and agreed to the terms, right? So if you have any questions, ask the agent for the officiated contract. I'm gonna stop my screen sharing and then I'll run you through what I usually ask for when I'm doing the advancing. So when you're sending out your advance to a promoter, you should include your technical writer, your hospitality writer, and any sort of tax documents. So if you're touring in the US, you're usually sending a W-9 if you're working with Americans in America. If you're working with non-Americans, they maybe have gotten a CWA. I don't know if anybody's done a tour where they had that. No, okay. So that's basically just a central withholding agreement, and it's so that's the IRS does not withhold 30% of the artist's pay. So this is something that the business management will set up for you, and you will have a letter with you. And this is something that I always send to the promoters, just so they're aware that they're not withholding. It's a big thing that happens with foreign bands. Yeah, and then I also scale my hospitality rider depending on the venue size. Like if you're playing a festival, they can probably afford to get you 2 bottles of Patron. If you're playing 500 cap rooms, that might not be in the budget. I'm coming from Canada here, and like a bottle of Patron's like 60, 70 bucks. But if your budget's $300 a day, you know, like you kind of have to speak with your band and be like, hey, this is the range of money that we're getting. What do you want to prioritize for this tour? And same thing if you're with an opener, you know, I try to see like, you know, realistically, we're not going to get probably more than $100 tops. So what do you want to see on the rider? What do you want them to shop for us? Do you prefer buyouts? Things like that. So, and then In my advance, I also include the number of people in the touring party, both for my act, again, if I'm the headliner, and if the support act, if I can. So that includes the artists as well as the support staff. I will try and send as well my preferred day of show schedule. So I will offer them a timeline that works for me, and hopefully they can run with it. If not, we can kind of like go back and forth on times. The vehicle that I'm traveling in, so that they can plan for my parking needs, hopefully for the opener as well, but sometimes that's not possible. If I'm using tour credentials, like if we have laminates, or if I'll need venue wristbands. Some venues won't allow you to use your laminates. It's a big thing in New York. So they do need to know, or like to know ahead of time, people in the touring party, to have those ready. And then obviously including my contact information, my cell number, it's in my email signature, just so they know who to call if we're late or if they have any questions. So yeah, good advance email. Where do we load in? Where do we park? Checking in with them on the hospitality budget as well. Sometimes you have that in the contract, but if the show's doing well or not doing well, they might want to renegotiate that a little bit. It can be, again, it's a bit of a courtesy that if the show's not doing well, that hopefully you won't take the full hospitality budget. At the same time, you know, you don't really, no band wants to hear like, oh, well, the show's not selling, so now they only want to give us $20. So you kind of have to find, you know, the medium in between both. I'll ask the venue for their updated technical specs. So I don't tour with a lot of production, so I'm relying on house production. So I do need to know, you know, is there a monitor console? How many monitor mixes can you accommodate? Things like that. I'll ask about merch location and setup, and I'll let the promoter know if I need any tables or grids or things like that, or if we're traveling with that. If you're not traveling with a merch person, you can definitely also ask the promoter to hire a merch person for you. So if I need that, I'll inquire with them ahead of time. This is something that has to be planned for. You can't just show up and demand a merch seller. Wi-Fi information, because that's the question that you're going to get all day, all the time for everyone. So get it ahead of time, put it in your master tour, send it in a group text, do something to save yourself. And I also ask, you know, who's my production contact, and if they're different, who am I settling with at the venue? So I'll get their name and their phone number if I have any questions. Yeah. It's kind of like my complete email. And I mean, I can post that in the group later, but it's like, I've got it all like formatted in my email, and I just will kind of change details depending which act I'm with, you know, if we're carrying in-ear monitors and things like that. And just kind of, I send the same template to all the promoters, obviously filling in their name and the date of the show and things like that. But once you have a good advance email, you can just kind of reuse it for all your bands, all your tours. Oh, Misty, you're muted.
Sorry, like I said, I have construction going on next door, so I keep muting myself when I'm not talking. Max, how important do you feel it is to have a conversation with your artist and your crew before the tour starts, you know, to go through those things like hospitality and what priorities are, and kind of set that expectation ahead of time?
I think it's super important, but sometimes, you know, like I'm fortunate that if I'm working with the same band multiple times, I feel like maybe we have a relationship and I can reach out to them directly. Mm-hmm. But if it's with a new client, then it can be a little more difficult. I mean, they might not answer. God knows lead singers love to not answer. And so it's maybe just kind of like, you know, hopefully the management knows enough about their artists to know, like, yeah, you know, like they're very healthy and they do really want that green juice, or they don't care, like as long as there's PBR, they're happy.
I often find that I use that as my bridge to kind of intro myself and to get to know them a little bit better, because those conversations, you know, when you start off a conversation with, I'm calling you to figure out how we can make sure that you are as healthy and as happy as you can be out on the road, mm-hmm. that just sets the tone right there. And, you know, any artist is going to be incredibly happy to hear those words coming out of their tour manager's mouth. And I also find that it helps in the long run, you know, a little bit later, if you do have that, you have to sit down and have that conversation of, hey, we need to cut some things out. You know, we started this off with trying to make sure to accommodate everything that we could for you, but now, you know, we're going into a few shows that, you know, we need to make it a little bit smaller. It helps them to understand a little bit more, knowing that you're going in fighting the good fight for them from the beginning.
I'd like to volunteer that also at the end of the night. I usually end up being the one to collect all the leftover rider from the dressing room to bring on the bus or to bring in the van or whatnot. And you'll start seeing like, oh, those baby carrots never get touched. And it's quite easy. Or you end up with an extra half bottle of tequila. So maybe I find that I advance as I'm on the road for hospitality because things change constantly. And, I'll start off saying like, I'll get tequila on Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays, and I'll get the bourbon on Mondays and Wednesdays. And then you end up not having all this like half empty liquor sitting in a van, which is not a good idea anyway. But these things are, hospitality at least is quite malleable, and you should expect to advance it closer to the show also, even though you've advanced
if they're
it
amendable
email.
to it, you know, like some promoters stop like 1 or 2 days ahead of time. So I mean that's obviously than 3 weeks before.
I get text day of like, oh, I'm shopping now. Anything else you need, or can we cut some of this stuff out? I'm at Whole Foods because it's too expensive, you know.
Yeah, it's great.
I will definitely say probably one of the easiest, best things that I was able to do when I was touring in clubs and smaller venues is whatever that one little thing was that the artist really, really, really liked to have, whether that was, you know, that bottle of vodka or that bottle of tequila, I always kept a spare of my own for that moment that they decide tonight's the night and I'm going for it. And, you know, before they even hit the stage, the bottle of vodka's down. And there is no better look than the look on someone's face when they realize, wait, she's got me. Like, now, granted, obviously, I'm not trying to encourage any artist to drink 2 bottles of vodka in a night. Not a thing. But oftentimes, if they have guests come out or friends or whatever, you know, that stuff goes away a lot quicker. And to be able to have that and your artist knowing very quickly that you've got their back on something that's really that can be that small, you know, it can make that relationship go a whole lot better and a whole lot smoother. You can talk them into doing things they don't want to do later on.
Let's just say I did that with after show food pizza. I'd always like hide like a crew pizza in my office.
Yeah.
And then the rest would go in the band dressing room. And that would be really great for the fact that sometimes, like Misty said, like you have a lot of people in the dressing room, the artist doesn't get to eat because they've just been talking to labels and all their friends and all this stuff, and then they're starving. So it's great you can swoop in there with a slice for them, you know, when they think, oh, we're out of pizza, and they're kind of annoyed. So
all of a sudden you're the superhero.
Yeah.
And I mean, you'll get this with like your time on the road, but I mean, like even rider stuff, like, yes, you're going to have to plan to have more alcohol in LA and New York and Toronto, probably, you know, if you're a Canadian band. Probably that Louisville show in Kentucky, the band probably doesn't have friends there, or not as many friends as they do in
I was
New
like,
York.
you'd be surprised.
Well, maybe with the country band from Kentucky, but you know, it really, you know, like maybe, or even just like asking ahead, you know, like, you know, I'll talk to like my main artist and be like, so, you know, when are you gonna need a lot of guest list spots? Like, oh, you know, you actually have family in St. Louis and you have 12 cousins coming. Okay, like,
Yep.
Good to know. You know, but there are going to be shows on the tour where, like, you know, there will be no one on guest list maybe and limited hospitality. So, you know, you can kind of plan your tour out that way.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And also the like the big cities like New York and LA, I find I always wind up with like massive hospitality budgets, and it's a really good time to stock up on those extra bottles of liquor.
Totally.
Or squirrel that extra money away for another day when it's really low on the budget. You have like a little slush fund.
Yeah.
I'd also recommend, if you are working with a kind of a tight budget with hospitality, one little trick I found is to have only half of the alcohol brought in at the beginning of the show, before the show, and then have the rest brought in after the show. That way, especially if there are a lot of guests, you don't want them to decimate all the alcohol and then suddenly the artist is asking you for more and the promoter's like, nah, we've run through all 150 bucks. So, hiding things in production offices is a great thing.
Well, yeah, and that $30 bottle of bourbon that, they got for you and your hospitality writer, suddenly if you have to buy it, after the fact because it's gone, that bottle turns into $100 bottle of bourbon majestically.
Yeah.
So,
I will say
it's
some
crazy.
venues are super cool though, because if you do a sellout show or 2 in a row with them sell out, and you're like, I really just need this, they'll understand and they will hook you up with a bottle of alcohol.
True.
But it's not something you can always rely on, and it definitely is dependent on your relationship with that venue coming in and going out.
Absolutely.
I have no shame. I will, like, even if the show's like half sold or something, I'm like, the artist put on a show, I've been nice to you. I'll be like, couple more beers.
Yeah.
And I will say that that's generally always worked for me. Like, I've never really, even if we were over budget, I think everybody's in it to have a good time. And that's also worked for me as a support act, because I've definitely been on tours where the headliner did not really want to accommodate. And then you can I just do sad puppy eyes and I'm like, they gave us 2 beers.
Yeah, I'd say just try and ask. Same with cases of water, which can be more valuable than alcohol at times.
Absolutely.
Always take your water at the end of the night.
Oh, always.
All right. I think that it definitely doesn't cover everything, because that things are always going to happen out of the ordinary, but that covers the basics of that. So I want to move on to Tiff discussing with us the venue end of advancing, because you have the experience of working in a couple of different venues. And do you want to start out by just telling us, I know for us, we sometimes being out on the road, we get super frustrated because we don't get the answers as quickly as we want. Can you explain to us what the venue side of all of this looks like? And, you have just as many shows as we do. You have a show every day, just the same. I'm just going to throw it to you and let you go for it.
Hi. So at the venues that I work at, I am frequently like the day of show promoter rep. I assist with the advancing, especially a lot of the production stuff. And all of my advanced documents are based on, basically when I started touring, I went to my production manager and I was like, look at this tech pack I have and tell me if this answers every one of your questions or not. And that's sort of like what I built on. So, and I actually called my production manager this morning and I was like, hey, I just want to go over like all this information I have. So, this is good. But yeah, a lot of times, like, I work at a 750 cap venue, like most of the time. And if you're a national touring act and you're coming through my venue, it's usually the time of year where it's super, super busy. I know my production manager is very good about getting back quickly, but not everybody has that time to be as quick as she is. So she's kind of scary quick. So a lot of, like, sometimes, like, people who are answering those emails have other jobs. This is maybe a part-time job for them. Sometimes it's a full-time job and they're just really slammed at the time. Then, just life happens. So that's what I would say about that. I just wanted to go through a couple of the things that I know Max touched on, like, pretty much a lot of what I was going to say, but I will kind of just go through and fill in a couple of blanks. From the venue perspective, the TM, as much as possible, should make the schedule. Like, when you send me that email, like, I want to know what your schedule is, because I don't know what you need as far as, your load-in time, how much time the opener needs, if you have meet and greets all day long. The venue, most of the time, is going to err on the side of paying less payroll. So I know that I've done a tour where I didn't set the schedule right away, and it was like 5 p.m. load-ins, and I really needed it to be like an 11 a.m. load-in. So if you make the schedule as much as possible, then you'll usually get what you need. Sometimes you'll wind up paying for the extra time. I know I did a tour where for some reason all the deals were done as if it was a 3 p.m. load-in, but it was another tour where I really needed it to be, you know, an 11 a.m. load-in. So about half the shows I wound up paying for just the crew to come in earlier, which really, like, our bottom line took a pretty bad hit. And that was a conversation we had to have with the agent for the next tour, but that's just another thing to keep in mind. When you send the schedule, you should include all of the information, like your load-in time, your line check, your sound check, if you have a meet and greet, if you need the venue to be dark at any point in time or quiet, like say you have a meet and greet happening on the floor when the opener's loading in. That means that we can't make any noise until you guys are done. So that's information that we need so that we can plan appropriately. So I'm reading off a really long document here and trying to make it concise. Oh, keep in mind, you know, how much time your openers actually need to load in, and that your venue staff needs a dinner break. Because I've found that a lot of people just, like people who are new, don't kind of keep that in mind. So there will be, sometimes they'll add an opener and we'll wind up with a half an hour between doors in the show. That means we have a half an hour to go find food, come back, eat, take a breath, which is kind of a pain. And then moving on to staffing, that's another thing that I want to know right away. Don't assume that just because it's in the budget that all of those people are going to be there. You may have stagehands and runners and LDs and merch sellers like in the budget, but if you don't tell the venue that you need those people there, they're not going to schedule them. So that's and there may be also, you know, some budget negotiations regarding staffing, like whether, like I've done, you know, that same tour where like I needed stagehands every day, but they weren't in the budget. So then that wound up coming out of our guarantee. So just that information. And in addition, like I need to know what venues, like what staff positions you need this venue to have. LDs, front of house, if you need a monitor engineer, if you need a merch seller, that's super, super important. And what time you want them to show up. Because obviously the merch seller doesn't need to be there at load in, but your LD probably does. So yeah, so I mean, if you don't give us like proper notice, then we may not be able to staff those positions, because people have lives, people have other jobs. And if I walk into a venue, like Max said, like you can't march in and like demand a merch seller day a show. It just doesn't work. I've also found that these like webinars like kind of make me a little nervous. I'm not used to like just talking to people. So if I'm talking really quickly, I'm really sorry. Just like wave at me and I'll slow down.
You're doing great.
Thanks. Yeah, so I mean, merch sellers, like especially like last minute, are really hard to find, and even sometimes with notice they're hard to find. So keep that in mind. Moving on to hospitality. This is like, I have a huge section on this because hospitality is my biggest pet peeve as like a tour manager and as a house production person, for various reasons that you're about to find out. So the big thing is like knowing the amount that's in your hospitality budget, like what is budgeted and how it's being spent. You want receipts, even for like house drinks, because that's your money. And I found that sometimes if you ask for receipts, all of a sudden your hospitality budget has $50 extra in it and they don't know where that came from, but here it is. So that's something to keep in mind. If they don't want to give you those receipts, that's a little bit of a red flag, and you should maybe pay a little closer attention to your settlement. And I always let people know in my advance email that I want those receipts and I want the balance in cash. Next question is, how do you want to spend your hospitality budget? Obviously, like, do you need cash for buyouts? Do you want it all spent on snacks and drinks? How many cases of water do you need? what, when I'm shopping, is like really important and like a deal breaker for you, and what can be cut. Because if it's up to me, like I might cut something that you think is really important that I just had no idea. Don't forget, some venues charge for towels. And
biggest scam.
it's a big scam. Exactly. It's the biggest scam. But it's like a thing that you have to factor in. Like if you need 5 towels and they're $5 a piece for some reason, like that's $25 out of your hospitality budget you have to worry about. So keep that in mind as well. The other thing is when you want the hospitality shop done. Do you want it done before we arrive or before you arrive? Do you want to give me a list when you show up? Do you want to give the runner a list when you show up? And if you want me to shop before, then you need to send me like an updated list the night before at least, because if you send it the morning of the show, like I may have already shopped, or it may go to somebody that's not me and I may not get it in time. So this is one of my personal pet peeves as like when I'm working as a PM, which is if you want the hospitality budget, like if you want the balance in cash, say your budget's $300 and I've spent $100 shopping and you've got $200 left, and you don't tell me you want the rest of that in cash at the end of the night, I may not be able to give you that budget at settlement, because depending on your deal, that may change the amount of money that your check has been written for or your wires have been done for. Not to mention, like some venues use credit cards, some use cash, like some just don't have the cash on hand to give you. So basically, like if you ask me for that budget at the end or the balance at the end of the night, like I have to talk to the person who did the settlement, which is usually not me, and make sure that I can give you that money like in cash. So it's just, that's like my personal pet peeve, because I go to people early and I'm like, what do you want to do with the rest of this money? And they're like, that's it. I don't want anything else. And I'm like, do you want cash? And they're like, no. And then they go to settlement and they're like, actually, I want like $200 in cash. And I can't just hand you $200. So that's that. And as a tour manager, my personal pet peeve when it comes to shopping is, like, it's really, really helpful when you shop the rider before I get there instead of after I arrive. Usually we've been traveling for like 4 to 7 hours in like a rolling tin murder machine. And we probably like stopped at a truck stop in the desert somewhere for like some McDonald's like 4 hours ago. And you roll in and there's like not even water. Like that really hurts my feelings. And that usually means that we don't load it on time, because then the band shows up and they're like, oh, there's no food, I'm going to go get something. And then that just pushes the whole schedule back. It's like, I always ask, can you shop ahead of time? And then when it doesn't get done, it like really hurts my feelings. Yeah. And then the last, and I swear to God, I will get off this hospitality thing. If you're headlining, like Max said, just don't forget to allocate for your openers. That's just the polite thing to do. They are your guests. And let us know what you want to spend on them. And if you are the opener, it doesn't hurt to like just make a special request. Like if you're advancing or you're putting the information out to the headliner's tour manager, like, we prefer stouts instead of IPAs, or like, we just want a case of water and the rest of the money in buyouts or something. Like, all I can say is no. Sorry guys. So yeah, moving on from there, I need to know if you need anything rented, and what your production needs are, and if you can send me a stage plot and all your production documents. Basically, if your show needs like a specific item to function, like say you're carrying a monitor console but not a split, or you have to have like in-ears or a wireless mic and you're not carrying those things, like I need to know about it. So I can determine like if we have those items in-house or if we need to rent them, or if you need to rent them specifically. And then do you need us to help you source that rental gear? Like, do you need me to contact some other production house? Do you need contact information? That sort of thing. And then if you are having gear delivered or rented to the venue, please let us know. Please let us know. I can't tell you how many times that we have like arrived at the venue and just been shocked to find like pallets of gear everywhere. And that kind of goes double for merch. I can't remember what band it was recently who had like 50 boxes of t-shirts delivered to the venue. And that's fine for us, but like a lot of venues don't have that kind of space. And then kind of in this area, I just have like the parking thing that Max talked about is like, what are you coming in and what kind of parking do you need? All right, cool. From there, we kind of went into like settlement and cash. Like we as a venue, or like especially if you're a promoter who's renting the venue, usually don't have just like a large amount of cash on hand. So if you need cash for settlement, it's really helpful if you let us know like at least a week in advance. And how do you want to get paid? Like, do you need a check? Do you need a wire? Do you need partial cash, all cash? And, you know, send your W-9s, W-8s, et cetera ahead of time. That will like totally expedite your settlement. And then talking about credentials, like this is not a big deal at some venues, like in advance. And like at mine, like it's fine. I don't need to know this information in advance. But when I started touring, it was like, I didn't include it in my tech pack the first time around. And it was like the top question I got asked by every venue was basically like, if we had our own credentials. So now I include it. So when you get to the venue, it's really helpful if you have your pass sheet ready to hand off to the PM for security, like when you arrive. That way they're not hassling everybody who comes in, checking laminates, like if anything's weird. And make sure it includes like all the types of passes that you have. So your laminates, your sticky passes, your wristbands, and what level of access and privileges each of those credentials has. That, because then if somebody shows up with a sticky pass, but sticky passes are only after show, like we don't know that information unless you tell us, more or less. And then if you need house credentials, like if you need house wristbands or laminates or sticky passes, whatever, like let us know ahead of time or when you get there. And that way we can have them for you before everybody sort of disappears for dinner. Because then when you come back in, you're gonna have a bad time. And what else do I have here? Oh yeah, if you send your photo policy ahead of time, like a lot of venues have information on the website, or they have an app, like we have an app at our venue that says that information ahead of time. And it just sort of like helps avoid issues like at the door when people are trying to bring pro cameras in or during the show. I had an incident, like, I feel like it was in Dallas, where our photo policy wasn't communicated to the staff at the door ahead of time. And somebody brought in a full 3D camera rig and was down front, like live streaming to YouTube, which was clearly a no-go. And that became an issue. But yeah, so it's just helpful to get that out ahead of time. And then basically just my last thing is kind of like, if you are like for the openers, if you can reach out ahead of time, like if you have the ability, just let us know like what your needs are from the house, like what gear you need, what crew you need us to provide, what crew are you bringing with you. It's helpful if I know that you have a front of house engineer, because then I don't have to go like listen to you ahead of time to find out what you sound like, you know, or I've already listened to you and decided, you know, how I'm going to mix you and like made a whole plan. And then you come in with front of house and you're on mics and everything. And I'm like, all right, well, okay, that's cool. Yeah, what crew you're bringing with you, like what time you're going to be arriving. And if somebody, for the love of God, could please send the openers contact information to the venue production manager, that would be fantastic. Because there's been a number of times where like all the advancing goes through the headliner and then they all take off for dinner. The opener never shows up right. Really late. We don't have any way to like contact them. Yeah, and I think my last thing is just like, please communicate, like for the love of God, like even if you just let us know, like, yes, I'm the right person to advance. No, I'm not ready. I will circle back to you in a week. Because otherwise it's just kind of like, you know, the same way, like if you're on tour and you're not getting communication from the venue, it's very frustrating. It's like, what is happening?
It takes 20 seconds to reply to an email and just simply say, I'm not there yet. I'll try and get to this by Friday or whatever.
Right.
I agree. And I feel like that falls on both sides of the fence. And I think that that's probably one thing that everyone could be a little bit better at doing. Right. There's no shame in being like, hey, I've got a lot going on right now. I'll get into this with you, you know, tomorrow or the following day.
It's respectful.
Yeah,
you know?
It is. It is.
That's all.
One thing that we have not really touched upon yet is festival advancing, because we all know that festivals are going to look a lot different going into than, being the headliner and going into a club show or a theater show. Festivals come in all different shapes and sizes, and what you're looking at for a backstage area, a schedule, a sound check schedule is a whole lot different. Do any of you, Mary, maybe you could pop in here with this one. And what I kind of want to talk about is how you're able to negotiate things on a festival level a little bit differently, because there are definitely going to be things that you're not going to get at a festival. And how far do you go with that negotiation before you just say, all right, screw it, we're going to roll in, we're going to roll out, nobody's going to die if they, we're in a tent for a dressing room, like, it is what it is. Like, how far do you go before you hit that point?
Well, I'll definitely like water down my hospitality list. Like, you really can't expect much with festivals. It's not all about you. It's actually all about the festival. And by I mean you, it's not all about your band. So you just kind of have to make like your camp literally and just kind of get what you can from them. But if there's something that's really important to the artist, or some piece of backdrop or set or something like a wireless mic that you really need to make your show shine, that's definitely worth arguing and talking with the production manager and the stage manager for the festival, whether it requires like getting in the night before to make it happen versus like what set load in time they've allotted you day of. So I try and push for technical things, because those are really end up being more important usually on festival days for bands than just making sure they have like 5 bags of Cheetos or something backstage.
True. It's true. Max, what about you?
For festivals. Yeah, I think definitely the technical aspect for me is more important. I also really like to know what they're providing me with. Like I said, I don't usually tour with a lot of productions, so knowing what they have available. So I'll ask for the pull sheets, because festivals are generally fly-ins, so you want the pull sheet for the backline to know what they have. And I mean, this is usually like when your an offer was made to the agent, like they usually have your backline specs, so they should know if you need a rare item. And that's the item that you might have to fight for or find a substitute for, because it varies country to country what's available. I've just toured with a lot of weird synth players, and that can be difficult to find. So that's definitely something with me that I like, loop me in with your backline person and I'll tell you the top 3 synths that I need, and you'll tell me what you have available.
We actually, that ties in a question that we just got from Stephanie Broderick, who she's a PM at a 9,000 cap venue that they sometimes have 24-hour operations with multiple acts. She says she's had a lot of people come, into the venue asking for gear, Euro converters that either cost a lot of money or they don't have the capacity to go and get. Do you guys take it into your own hands as a TM to try and go get that if the venue's not able to for the act? Or, how do you break that to your artist? We don't have that, so this isn't going to happen tonight.
I mean, if I can just answer with the rare synth stuff, because like literally, like I've had airlines lose the synth that's not replaceable the day before the show for 30,000 people. Like, you have to find substitutes, and you have to find ways to fly with those that are maybe it's, you have a smaller MIDI controller version that you can bring as a carry-on. Like, is it a showstopper? Is it not? Like if you tour with tracks, you should always, for example, have the tracks rig with you as a carry-on. And with the converters, I think you need to check your gear. Like most modern gear is adaptable, switchable. So, you know, I'll make my artists buy either like new IEC cables or just a bunch of adapters. Like you don't always need the converter.
Right.
And I mean, if you're doing a festival, I mean, I don't know if you guys have done a festival where they didn't have a converter.
I've not run into that, but yeah.
I mean, like, I feel like they usually at least have like one
Yeah.
transformer, but I mean, most of your gear is switchable. But yeah, I mean, I think it can come down to like talking to the artist and being like, you know, like, yeah, what's the fine line between it being a great show and it maybe not being the exact same synth or guitar that you use on the record, and what's available across the world. You know,
Yeah.
like when you make a backline list, you want it to be like, you know, like Fender stuff, like easy to accommodate drum kits, you know, things like that, you know.
Yeah.
I think in general, I've tried to, before leaving for tour, talk about on a very, especially tech heavy tour, say if you're dealing with, you know, tons of MIDI and whatnot, what's the most important piece? Can we afford to get a spare for it? Getting a contact for the company that makes it, you know, even if you don't have an endorsement, you can say that you're on tour with this band and playing this big festival, and, you know, just having that contact, just let them know, invite them to the show. Maybe you'll get an endorsement and get a free spare out of it. But being prepared, if you tech heavy show, what's the backup? There should always be a backup. It could even be a case where, you know, you're doing a radio show and you can't bring the whole A rig and you have to have a separate little B rig. And how can you do this without all of the gear? Like, are you willing just for this one show to give up a little bit of control and just play the backing tracks as opposed to actually mixing the backing tracks live, or, you know, come up with an acceptable B rig situation so you're not caught in that. But I mean, festivals, they will screw up. Case in point, in my experience, I did Field Day in London, which I did it twice and I hope I never have to do it again. Lovely people, but just horrible infrastructure. And literally from changeover to through like 5 minutes within our start time, we still didn't have one transformer on the stage, even though that they were advanced completely. I wasn't tour managing that one. But at that point, it's just like, no, we're doing our whole set. You know, you've wasted our time. We didn't get a sound check. You know, there is like a little bit of leeway in some festivals, I suppose. But if you're with a proper festival, you won't have to worry about this. If you advance everything that you absolutely need, it'll be there. You know, you're not going to have a problem with Coachella if you told them absolutely everything that you need. An established festival like that. Smaller festivals, you know, just be as clear as possible. This is non-negotiable. We need to have this power on this side of the stage and that side of the stage. And, you know, another good thing to know is transportation time from backstage to tent, you know, to stage, because that can really screw you over.
Yeah, it was
a huge festival.
Like probably technical stuff and any kind of provisions or amenities the festival can provide regarding transportation on and off property, picking you up at the airport, or even just if there's bicycles or something available. It just depends on how huge of a footprint the festival is itself.
Yep.
Like Lollapalooza, that can take like 10-15 minutes to get from one side and the other, even in a golf cart, you know, which is my favorite part of the day.
You need to know what tents are and everything in regards to your actual stage you're on.
Catering, where is that? You know, I mean, you'll find out quickly, like, you know, getting all that information in advance is so helpful because usually festivals can be pretty hectic. Especially night sets.
I'm finding these days a lot more often too that a lot of the larger major festivals are setting up portals that have that entire, you know, tech package of maps and everything you could possibly ask for. You know, they're definitely getting better, and it's starting to get a little bit easier because, as we all know, festivals are can be rough, to say the least.
Also, just be kind to your stage manager and your artist rep, because they're dealing with more bands than you are at the time. And you know, patience and you know, knowing what you're going to need at the beginning of the day and not bothering them for the rest of the day as much as possible. You know, this is, they have a really hard job, and they've probably been like in crazy weather for like 17 hours and not sleeping very much the whole weekend. So bring your salad person a beer, maybe, you know.
Dana, let me ask you, what's the first thing that you do when you arrive on site to a venue?
I meet head of production. I meet whoever's paying me if they're available, and if they're not, then I make sure that production knows to make an intro. Check out the dressing room, make sure hospitality is there if they agreed to bring it at load in, and talk to the audio tech because I'm usually mixing also.
Gotcha.
So make sure that they have the updated rider because, as was pointed out, booking agent always sends an old rider.
Always.
You know, but yeah, that's just make point. Also, I'm horrible with names. I am so shit with names. So I will put their name in my phone as I meet them, you know, in front of house, you know, because sometimes you will get their names in advance, but maybe like, you know, the stagehand that you really need to rely on, you want to know their name and just make a note.
Yeah. I'd say same with runner too. Once you meet that runner, get their name and their number in your phone because they might be gone for a while. And if they have your credit card, if you have to give them your band credit card, you need that number.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Mary, what is the one thing that you feel is the most overlooked but yet really important thing to do when you're getting ready to leave for tour? What's like the one thing that you just go, damn it, I forgot that again?
Oh man. My laminate? I don't know. Probably for me, I like to make sure everything personally is dialed in for me before I leave. Like I just clean my house, do all the bills, do all the things. So having peace of mind that my personal life is tidy, that's big for me. That's kind of what the main thing is, because the worst stress is for you to be away from home and you can't get there to take care of something once a tour starts and your job starts, because that's what you really have to focus on. You can't focus on your personal life anymore, really.
Right. It's very, very true. I'm going through some of the questions that we got after last week's, and there's so many good ones. Let's see. Max, how important do you think it is to be friends with the artists that you're tour managing?
I mean, I wish the people could explain what they meant. I mean, friends like, you know, going out for coffee when the tour is not happening, or friends like having a good relationship on the tour?
I would lean more towards the having a good relationship when you're on the tour.
I think it's really important, you know, like we talked about last week, it's all about the vibes on tour. You're spending a lot of time together. And I mean, if you don't appreciate each other, then there's not really much point in being there. You know, like they're not going to want to hire someone that they don't want to see every day. And I mean, personally, if I think you're a horrible human being, I don't want to be on the road with you either. You know, like it goes both ways. So yeah, I think, you know, you have to get to know them a little bit, their quirks and everything. So
have you ever run into a situation that you've had to try to kind of figure out maybe that balance? Like I mean, personally, I've been on the road with, you know, either people in a band or the artists themselves that I didn't particularly like, but you know, I already had accepted a job. I was involved in it at that point and had to, you know, figure out, how do you figure out that balance? I mean, I know that personally myself, I have had to find myself like pulling myself back from saying certain things at certain times, you know, for the sake of professionalism. Have you ever been in a situation like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because like I think one of the first people I toured with, like I didn't really think about it, but in retrospect, we like didn't have much in common, and like it wasn't it you know, like when you're in the moment, you're not really thinking about it, but then when you're like off the road, I'm like, oh, like yeah, every time we had a night off, everybody would just sit in their single hotel room, and we never did like family supper. you know, and again, you got to find the balance. You don't want to be hanging out with the same people all the time, but we never had that, like, I'm sure you guys can relate, but when you're on tour, you kind of become a monster organism. And, you know, you're like, I'm going to go get a coffee alone. And you turn the corner and like half the band's there. And you're like, oh, well, that's fine. You know, it's just like, you're so used to spending time together. And it's kind of comforting in a way when you get home where you're like, oh, the drummer is not sitting around the corner anymore, you know? And with that tour, like, we never had those moments. And, you know, when they didn't ask me back, I'm like, you know what? I don't think I was the right fit. And
I've had that same situation. And there's something that's a little freeing in that feeling of going, I'm not upset about this. Like, I'm not bothered by the fact not being asked back, because maybe I wasn't enjoying myself or feeling like I had the ability to fully be myself either while I was out there.
I mean, I will say that at the moment, it really, really hurt me.
Oh, it does. It sucks.
I didn't really have the experience to know that there was better out there. And then like being hired by a band that was like, we want to take you out for supper, and like, hey, we're in this city we really love. Let us like introduce you to our friend, and this is our front of house. She's so great. You know, like I was like, oh shit, like there is another side to this, you know, and I'm fortunate that I got to experience that. But
I've also had a very strange situation that you can not like someone and still respect them, obviously. You know, I was out on tour with a certain band, and I just really, really didn't get along with the guitar player. We just didn't see eye to eye on fundamentally anything. And when I moved back to Los Angeles, my first night here, I walked outside of my front door to go take a walk and realized that he was my across the street neighbor.
Wah, wah.
Wah, wah, wah. But it was funny because, you know, in that I would walk outside of the coffee shop, and there he was. And we started to be able to actually kind of be able to deal with each other out on the road a little bit better, having that understanding. Oh, great, you're also my neighbor, because now you're also infiltrating my personal life as well as my professional life. So it forced me to learn. It forced me to learn that there is a balance in that, and it can be found. It's not always the easiest, but it can be found. Let's see.
I would just like to add, on the flip side of that, I am like really close friends now with so many people that I've gotten to tour with since, you know, the early 2000s. My first artist that took me on an international tour is my best friend, you know, and I've stayed at, you know, these people's houses around the country, around the world. And, you know, that's not to say that every day on tour was great. I think I made the point last week that, you know, everybody's going to have an off day on tour. It's a weird situation where you're seeing people 24/7. It's being married to them. And it's about, you know, being forgiving if somebody's a little sharp one day, maybe. And, you know, you might be sharp one day. I know I've been, and I've had to, you know, go back with my tail between my legs and apologize for being a dick for a day. You know, but that's how you forge friendships. And if you can get past these little, you know, mood swings that we can all have, then yeah, I mean, I have friends decades old now that I've spent a lot of time in a van or a bus with, and I consider them brothers and sisters, basically. So, you know, that absolutely happens, and I'm so fortunate to say that that's the majority of my experience rather than the other way. And there are some people I hope I never see again, but
you know what?
That happens too.
I would say it's about a 90-10. 90%, I would say I would love to run into at any given point.
Yeah.
Man, that 10%, I will go out of my way to avoid in anything that I have to do.
I'd also like to say that if you are in a close-knit crew or band and you're on tour and having a great time together and everybody gets to know each other so fast, just remember why you're there, and that professionalism does matter and personal respect does matter. I don't think that just because you become a friend with somebody on tour, you can expect, like, I don't know, special treatment, or that you might get brought back on the next tour. also you can't expect everybody to stay in contact the way they did on tour, off tour, you know? And I think that's kind of a big learning curve that some people have when they first start touring.
Definitely. I would say, I mean, you know, going out on an arena tour and there are 100 people out there, there are maybe 2 or 3 of them when it's over with that I actually stay in contact and like make plans and follow up on, you know, going to coffee or dinner. You know, it looks very different. And, you know, also for myself, when I get home, I have found myself out on the road forcing that extroversion. And, you know, the first like month that I'm at home, you can't get me to pick up the phone if you paid me. I'm like, I want nothing to do with any human ever right now. So, you know, everybody has their own way of dealing with it. And, you know, it's always going to look different when you end a tour. You know, there are some tours that I've ended that, you know, I still talk to every single person that was out on that tour with me. But there are some tours that I don't talk to a single one of them. You know, everybody's going to have their own dynamic. This one is a very, very broad question, and in going through these questions, it's the one that popped out at me the most, and I want to get each one of you to take a moment and answer it. What do you think the toughest challenge for you is of being a tour manager, and have you ever been treated differently because you were a woman tour manager? Tiff, you go first.
So for me, I think that my biggest challenge has been probably trying to balance my time between the audio part and the tour manager part without letting one of those two things not happen well. Because I really do like take pride in what I do. And I'm such a perfectionist that when, like, if something starts to slip because I have to focus too much on one or the other, then it really bothers me. And I guess probably being really hard on myself is another thing that's really difficult for me. I mean, like I said last week, I feel like I get more of the weird sexist attitude from when I am at home at my venue job, just doing audio. That's when I get most of my, you know, flack, more or less. I haven't really experienced that as much being a female tour manager. It happens, but it's, you know, more when it comes to the technical stuff and less when it comes to the like taking care of people, handling the money stuff. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally. Dana, what about you?
So there's so many hard things about being a tour manager, but the thing that I struggle with maybe the most is when I get on a new tour, is kind of finding that rhythm of, you know, what's expected from me so I can be intuitive about what's needed. I find, you know, there's a lot of people that will not make any requests, but they'll be kind of simmering, you know, resentful that
Passive
what they need
aggressive?
isn't there. Yeah. I don't even think it's a conscious thing sometimes,
Yeah.
you know, but you have to, you know, sometimes you have to, you know, if I'm having a hard time kind of getting that rhythm, I'll absolutely go and hold somebody's hand, not literally, but just say, hey, you know, is there anything that's missing? Like, you know, especially that first week of touring with a new band, just staying on top of that and, you know, getting out of my own head about what I think is needed and trying to get what they need. As far as being treated different as a tour manager, as a woman, I find it more on the audio side. I don't really, not that I can remember, I've had any issues feeling kind of condescended to as a tour manager, but definitely the audio side, that's a whole other webinar. We all have stories, right?
Yeah.
So,
What about you, Max? Oh, sorry.
Sorry. I would just say, like, if there is any problem, I'd make a point to let people know why I'm there, and that I'm there for a reason, no matter what my job is. So don't question it.
Yep. All right, Max, you're up next.
I mean, I think like Tiff said, like finding the balance between audio and tour managing can be really difficult. And some days it really does feel like it's impossible to get that balance. You know, like if I had to run around to do a lot of tour manager stuff, if, you know, there was equipment that was broken or something, and then the sound check was kind of cut short, that really bums me out. And I think has just led me to be like ultimately try and be better prepared as a front of house, or ask for help from the venue if I need. So like, for example, if I don't have like a file for the console, if it's like early on in the tour, I might ask the local front of house to build a file while I'm dealing with hospitality or something like that, just to try and multitask. And for the sexism question, I think that a lot of times people associate like caring and hospitality with women. So there's a little bit less of that with tour managing than with the audio side, I think, because I always laugh. So my name is Maxim, and that's generally a boy's name. So I think that sometimes I get the benefit of the doubt, although I do have my pronouns in my email signature now. But it's just really funny showing up to a venue and I say, no joke, I think it's 4 times in my advance email that I am front of house, and people will be like, oh, you're mixing? I'm like, oh my God, it was in the advance. And you know, like, not to say that you can always laugh at all of it, but I think of one venue in particular, they weren't answering my emails. And when I got to the venue, I'm a speed reader, it's gotten me in trouble, but the day sheet that the venue rep had built for the person who was handling the show with me had a line that said, tour manager has been needy, be careful. And I laughed. I mean, you know, I didn't say anything, but they like, the rep was on there like all day. They were just like, hey, are you good? Do you need anything? And I'm like, no, man, I'm good. Like, this is great. Thanks for the pizza. You know, like, I was like, this is so funny. It's just because you wouldn't answer the email, you know, like, that's why I kept being like, please answer, please answer.
What a dick.
Wow.
The venue did not, this pre-pandemic, that venue closed. So sad day for everybody.
Yeah. I get it a lot on the road. I mean, obviously my name is Misty Roberts. I get emails back that say, hey, Robert, Misty, thinking automatically that I'm a male. I mean, that happens a lot more often internationally, touring, but I've definitely run into, I come from maybe a little bit different of a perspective of it, just focusing on, you know, tour managing and production coordinating. We definitely see it on our side. I love nothing more than first thing in the morning walking into a venue, and when the venue production manager will, you know, I'll walk up and introduce myself and they'll say, cool, where's your tour manager? You clearly must be the assistant because you're a girl. You know, they don't say that, but you can see it. You can see the insinuation of it. And, or, you know, doing shows and having myself as the tour manager and a male as the production manager, I'll say something and then they'll instantly turn and look at the production manager to get the cosign for it because he's a man. So I've, you know, gotten to a point that I've started to look at people and be like, you don't need him to answer. I just gave you the answer. I don't need his signature on this. And I'm looking very forward to the day that I can go out and do a tour where the production manager is also a woman and we can look at each other and just laugh and go, what the hell are they going to do now?
I mean, side note, I worked at a venue in Toronto where we actually had an all women, non-binary people audio team, which I will say, touring internationally, I have not seen very often. And it was incredible to see people's minds being blown.
Oh yeah.
Like sometimes
absolutely.
people just like, people wouldn't know what to ask. Like, where's the audio console? I'm like, oh, you're talking to me? Like, it was pretty great.
Mary, what about you?
Probably one of the most difficult things for myself is when you're the new person on the team, when like everybody else has been established and they're already family, and then you've been hired in either as a new component to the tour or as a replacement for somebody else who didn't work out, I think trying to get a good rhythm with that team, it can be a little difficult if, say, you're noticing things that shouldn't have been going on, or crew members maybe not really doing their job the way they should be, and having to have those difficult conversations. So just the constructive criticism you give to people sometimes when they need it, and the defense they put on you because of you trying to help them, that's really hard to navigate. As for, you know, being targeted as a female and treated differently, 100%. I've got it from bus drivers or from a venue, local stagehands. And in those instances where I can, like, I'll try and work it out with them. But if it's just not working, I'll go to the promoter and say, we need to get a new person for our venue for the day, for like us being here. Or again, with the bus company, I'll talk to the bus company and say, hey, listen, like, I can't deal with somebody who's like this for 6 weeks. Like, I have to get a new person, you know? And you try and make a good effort with these people. But if they aren't helping you out and they're just like not respecting you, then it's just not worth having them on the team, you know? I've even gotten it from another crew member before, and they just flat out said, like, I knew it was a bad idea to have a female on tour. And that was another girl. And that happens. It's not just a male versus female thing.
Absolutely.
It's a supportive thing. Like, everybody has to be on the same team, especially women, you know? You can't just like be rude and classify people based off their gender.
Absolutely. I have known many, many men and women that are fantastic at their job. And I've also known many men and women that suck at their job.
Yeah.
It's equal opportunity. You know, it really shouldn't matter. And you bring up a really, really good point about the getting it also from females out on the road. You know, it's it kind of depends upon, you know, someone's experience with that, but I've definitely been out on the road with females that are very, very used to being the only female on that tour. And so when you enter onto their turf, it's, you know, they're very territorial, and you really have to treat that with a very, you know, delicate new navigation into it to try and make sure that works.
It's its own dance for sure. And I think
definitely,
if you're used to traveling with another female, you kind of have to look inside yourself and check yourself sometimes if you start acting like that.
Yeah, it can be a really good mirror, you know, using that other person as a good mirror to yourself. I do find that, you know, anytime that I feel like I have been disrespected out of, you know, being a female and walking in somewhere, that oftentimes it's really just the easiest to call it out and ask the question, like, how can we get past this? Is there, like, are you going to have a problem working with me for the next 6 weeks?
I've had to take somebody aside and just say, hey, I know you're mad at me and I don't know why. And I'd really like to help solve this problem because we're in the middle of Zagreb, Croatia.
Right.
And we're going to be in Europe and sitting in the front seat of a splitter van for the next 4 weeks. So, you know, I had to initiate that conversation because this other woman was being, you know, the way I was, you know, I felt she was being quite aggressive and it was almost getting physical. And I'm like, this is not sustainable.
Well, and, you know, I also feel as a tour manager, it is your responsibility to initiate that conversation. And, you know, the easiest way that I found to launch into that is, we're going to be on tour for the next 6-8 weeks, however long. Are you going to be able to take direction from me? And that really applies male or female. You know, it really, are you going to be able to take direction from me? Because that essentially is what it comes down to. We're air, you know, like ground control. We're directing everybody in 8 million ways. And it's a very direct and a very across the board question that can be asked to anyone. And, you know, it takes a lot for somebody to actually look at you and say, no, I don't think so. But if they're able to do that, then so be it. Then we need to move on to the next person. we have a ton of questions. So I'm just gonna go through a couple of them really quickly. Dana, how do you deal with bands that are constantly late for van or bus call?
You know, there is only so much that you can do to get somebody in the lobby on time. Bus call, you know, the point that I make is that it's not our convenience, it's the driver's inconvenience. And this is the person that is responsible for our safety overnight as they're driving. And, you know, they're the ones that's doing the driving. So out of respect for them, when it comes to say like lobby call for a van tour, you know, I just make it a point to say this is coming out of our sound check time. If you need a sound check, if you want time in the city after sound check, it all comes out of sound check time, because we're not, you know, you can't extend sound check in a lot of situations. You know, it ultimately is the band's loss if somebody's late. And if it's a crew, that's a little bit more cut and dry. You know, this isn't gonna work if you're gonna keep being late, and, you know, please be on time. And then worst comes to worst, some people get one lobby call time and other people get a lobby call time that's 20 minutes earlier.
I don't ever let it get that far. And I find across the board, band and crew, the first time that you threaten their money, I just say, you know, of course they get their, you know, 2 strikes, 3rd strike, you're out. You're going to get docked $10 from your per diem every time you're late for lobby call.
I've never tried that. I would like to.
Oh, hit people's wallets.
But I mean, on a small van tour, I don't know how, like, you know, this is, you know, when you're dealing with like such small amounts of money for the session musicians and whatnot, you could say it, but I don't know if you could actually enforce it.
If you're handing them their money, you can absolutely enforce it.
And then, yeah, but then you're in a van with them all day. It's not like you can close the curtain on your bunk. I mean, I don't know. I'll
give you the very the therapist version of that. You didn't cause the problem.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
At some point, someone has to take personal responsibility for themselves.
Yeah.
Misty, can I put you in my pocket on tour?
Right?
Little tips from Misty.
You are now $15 less money per diem. And, you know, people are not happy about it. I mean, I'll tell you that, but it gets the point across. Like, it's not trying to be a bitch by any means. What it is that you need to respect that, you know what, I have things that I was doing in my hotel room that I was busy on, and I made it down here. It's
I mean, nobody,
other people's time.
Nobody the rest of the people that are sitting there waiting.
Yeah.
They wanted to spend an extra 10 minutes in their room as well. They didn't want to wake up as early, and then you're just sitting there waiting.
Yeah.
It will, you know, if you talk to them about it, surely somebody else will be talking to them about it as well. Or not surely, but quite possibly. So I've never had anything so dramatic, but yeah, I will say like, you know, why is it always the singer and the drummer?
Always the drummer.
I will give them. You think they're, you know, they know about time, right? And they're the drummer. But yeah, definitely. I will slyly give 2 different times.
Yeah.
Well,
and people get the correct times will know.
I'm gonna make this our last question because we're coming up on 2 hours. Have you ever encountered issues with a language barrier when advancing shows outside of your country? And how do you overcome that?
I'd say no, I have not. I do know a lighting friend of mine. She was on an advance with a production manager, and she was from England and he was from the States, and it was for a US advance, and they just had different terms for the same thing.
Right.
So they just kind of were running around in circles over the same conversation, and it wasn't until they got on the phone that they were able to figure out, like, oh, we mean the same thing.
Yeah, I've definitely run into that, and sometimes getting on the phone internationally is actually harder. Even I've had it the opposite, where it's easier to, you know, try and advance that hotel through an email, because more than likely, if they're an international hotel, someone in their sales department, you know, is familiar. I will say that one of the things that I always tell myself as a good reminder, hey, don't get mad about this because you're the one that only speaks one language.
Mhm.
They're trying to speak two. It's a reminder I give myself all the time across the board, traveling internationally, you know, with runners. I always, the first thing they'll come in and they'll be like, I'm so sorry, my English is really bad. And that's the first thing I say to them. I'm like, you speak two languages, I only speak one.
Exactly.
You're doing great. You know, you just have to be really patient. Do any of you other guys have any experience or any workarounds to advancing when there's a language barrier?
I've had some difficulties in Italy, just minor things on the technical side, not so much on the advancing side. You know, you learn that, well, Italy is a great example. Production values are quite a bit lower in some countries than others. You'll come into a venue at the assigned load-in time and the PA is all over the floor and they're having a cigarette and espresso. Like and this is from experience.
Totally.
You know, so just, you know, the best you can do is be clear and concise, and then Google Translate on my phone has been a lifesaver at times, especially needing some technical situations that maybe they don't speak much English at all, and you need to know if you can get those subs in an aux, and you know, this is helpful just to have your phone handy.
Absolutely. I use Google Translate like nobody's business. Well, I think that we're going to wrap this up today. If you guys have questions, please feel free to send those in for next week. We are going to do our third of 3 next week, and we're going to talk about day of show. And I'm really, really, really excited to see Dana's Pelican Case.
Excited to show it.
All right. Thank you, all of you, for making time and showing up, and we'll see you next week.